Support for Current Conversations is provided by Outreach Video and Media Services, University of Oklahoma Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis-Undiano. Today, we are on location at the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Fort Worth, Texas. We'll be talking about race in the media, and our special guest is Franchesca Ramsey, the host of the MTV web series Decoded. Stay with us and meet this media personality and social commentator. Franchesca Ramsey, thank you so much for being on Current Conversations. It's just really great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
So, you are a celebrity for a lot of young people in America.
Okay.
It's true.
I still feel so weird when people say that.
Well,
but thank you.
You can't say it, but I can, and it is true. But for folks that haven't seen Decoded, your show, or ever seen you on MTV or anything like that, would you describe what you do and what your show is like?
Sure. MTV Decoded is a part sketch show, part vlog, which is a video blog, so me talking straight to camera, and it's all about the intersection of pop culture and race and identity. So we're all about taking hard questions and big topics and decoding them, breaking them down so that they're easier to understand using comedy and pop culture references.
You know, I am so glad to hear your description of what you do, because I've kind of fallen into the platitude that there isn't really a lot of national helpful discussion of race. It just doesn't happen very much.
It's hard.
It sounds like that's exactly what you're doing, though.
Yeah, it's difficult. I realize that there is just so much taboo when it comes to talking about race, and a large part of it is because the way that we talk about it in our education system. A lot of times things are super watered down, and the way that we understand our nation's history has been really convoluted. So we are really trying to put a new spin on these conversations so that they are a little bit easier, and so that people can understand how our history impacts today, and why certain people feel so passionate about their identities and certain issues related.
You know, I just got to think that what you're doing is so amazingly ambitious, really. I mean, as somebody described what you do, we're going to decode sort of multi-layered situations that have a kind of racial component, but people don't often see that. I think people would say, they're not going to go with that. Has it been hard to get that going? What has the response been? I mean, how do you feel about it?
It's been a challenge. You know, we've been doing the show for 2 years. We're in our 5th season, so we've got over 60 episodes, and we have talked about so many different things, and we've learned a lot along the way. I've been making YouTube videos for about 11 years. So I have a lot of practice when it comes to talking about social issues in a comedic way, and that really helped prepare me for Decoded. So we listen to our audience a lot when it comes to what topics to tackle. We're not perfect, of course.
Is that a key for you? You say a comedic way to kind of grease the wheels a little bit?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I mean, again, these topics are really difficult for people. And so if you can talk about them in a way that makes them feel more comfortable, answer some questions that they have that maybe they're uncomfortable asking, or they think might make them sound bad or dumb, then we've found that can really help open the door and make people feel a little bit more comfortable.
Comedy can kind of let people off the hook a little bit. I had that thought the other day. I was watching Kamau Bell on United Shades of America, and he's so good at that. You know, I mean, because there are people on that show just saying sometimes awful things.
And he does a really great job of diffusing those comments with something funny, or just kind of giving voice to the reactions of the audience, where he might just have a facial expression that you're thinking, oh my gosh, I feel the same way. And we do a lot of that on our show, and I really look up to Kamau.
So you're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah,
you're doing
I got to work on Totally Biased, which was his FX show. He's super talented, and again, just his show really exemplifies the fact that these conversations are needed. And so our show is really targeting, a millennial audience. We've got a lot of teenagers and high schoolers who enjoy our show. And what's so cool when you get invited to things like NCORE is that colleges are watching these in their classrooms. And, it's really resonating with a lot of young people that want to talk about this stuff but aren't really sure how.
I'm really glad you're talking about this intersection of race and comedy as a way to talk about it, because just to say with Kamau Bell just for a moment, there are times where people say things on the show that would absolutely be conversation stoppers.
Right.
Where can you go from there? And he makes it so clear, and this is probably what you do too, that he doesn't take it personally, that that's not the end of the discussion, right. And then the comedy just allows him to go right on. And I think that's just so important that discussion of race not get kind of dead-ended on somebody's nasty comment.
I think you have to, when you're having these conversations, for me, it's often about meeting people where they're at. And so if someone is willing to have the conversation, sure, sometimes people are going to say things that make you uncomfortable or are inappropriate. And I think you have every right to be upset or offended or hurt by those things. I think there is validity in those feelings, but also to know that if somebody is willing to have the conversation with you and they want to learn and they want to be better or they want to actually be more sensitive to certain issues, then you kind of have to, again, meet them where they're at and move forward from there. And I think Kamau's really good at that, and that's what we really try to do on Decoded.
Jose Antonio Vargas does that too. He's not comic, but he just doesn't ever allow the discussion to get kind of sidelined in any one spot. He just keeps it moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's really important, again, to acknowledge that there are times that those comments happen and you're going to get upset, And I think that is human nature. It's natural. There's a lot of pain associated with, racial oppression and injustice. And so people get upset. And I never want to put anybody in a position where they feel like I'm telling them that their feelings aren't valid. Because not everybody is cut out to have a funny joke or be really receptive. Sometimes people want to pop off, and I understand, because that makes you upset. And I think that everybody's approach is different. But the more I can try to be open to talking to people, through their uninformed opinions or really kind of help expand their minds or expose them to different types of people or different ideas, I think there's a lot of benefit there.
I just got to think that the approach you're taking is really very important and very promising. And I can't prove this, but it's my sense, really, honestly, that there are millions of white Americans who've never known somebody from another country, don't know a black person well, or whatever. And that's a difficult place to start from personally, just having had no personal experience with somebody different from yourself.
Absolutely. And here's the thing, what we talk about on Decoded is we talk about, race and identity, but we also talk about the fact that there are people that have these internal biases across all backgrounds. Like, yes, of course, there are people that are white that have not been exposed to people of color, or there are straight people that have never met LGBT folks.
Ever.
There are cis people that have never met trans people. There are Americans who've never met undocumented immigrants. So there are lots of people who have these biases because they haven't been exposed to these types of people. And instead, they have, kind of grown up hearing these negative things about other groups. And there's never been anyone there to challenge them. And so we're really trying to make sure on our show we're not finger pointing and saying, listen, white people, you need to do this. We're saying we all have work to do. There's things that I need to do. There are conversations that I haven't been exposed to. And I'm really fortunate that my audience holds me accountable and lets me know sometimes, like, you got this thing wrong, or can you talk about this thing because you haven't talked about it before. And for me, I found that if we're a little bit more open about the work that we personally need to do, it becomes easier for other people to do that work too.
I just think you make such an important point here. I'm kind of a rationalist. I think people respond to what they know.
Right.
And you're basically saying you're going to meet people where they are. And
a lot of people don't know what they don't know.
Exactly, yeah. And through comedy and the sort of kind of pronged approach you're taking, they do learn things that changes who they are. That's really valuable.
I believe so. And, I am so fortunate that people take the time to send me emails and tweets and snaps and messages to let me know that my work has resonated with them, or they used it to start a conversation with their their coworker or their parent or their partner, or, just kind of acknowledging for themselves, like, wow, I was completely unknowledgeable about this, or I thought about this the wrong way, and you opened my eyes. And I'm so fortunate because I get to do something I really enjoy that I think has some real power.
To get responses like that, you must feel just really, really good about it.
No, it's not all good responses.
No, it's not all like that, yeah.
Some of them are a little, people get mad.
Can you give an example of maybe something that you did on the show recently that worked especially well, that you got a very good response, where you were kind of dissecting the layers of something or giving the real racial content of something?
So this season, we've actually really been expanding to talk about things outside of racial identity, just so that we can try and reach as many people as possible. And our most recent episode for Mental Health Awareness Month was talking about the stigmas surrounding mental health. And again, we like to use pop culture references. So we talked about how often in movies, oftentimes the killer has some sort of mental illness, which perpetuates the stigma that if you're mentally ill, you're more violent. When in reality, if you have a mental illness, you have a higher chance of succumbing to violence at the hands of someone else or hurting yourself.
Interesting.
And so we got a lot of messages from people who said, oh my goodness, I have suffered with depression or anxiety and my family doesn't understand, and I can use this video as a jumping off point to say, look, I'm glad that you love me, but love is not going to help me get through my mental illness.
Right.
And so we really just try to put it in plain English. And again, using those pop culture references, whether it's 13 Reasons Why or Psycho or, M. Night Shyamalan has a new movie, Split, which is about split personalities.
I love his work.
People are really influenced by these things, and they don't realize how powerful it is to see these depictions of people with mental illness. And then when you have a friend or family member with mental illness, you might not be as sensitive or understanding because you have this negative or limited perception that's been based on media and pop culture.
Now, if people watch Decoded, are they going to see you looking at a camera and a lot of graphics, or
absolutely. So it's me straight to camera. We do a mix. So sometimes we do sketches where it's me out in the world doing character-based stuff, or out on the street interviewing people. But a lot of times it's me straight in the studio, looking right into the camera, answering questions that people might have with lots of different graphics and cutaways and jokes and things like that.
And your demographic is a lot of young people, probably.
We do.
18 to 30.
I would say that the largest part of our audience is that 18 to 34, which is the millennial sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
But it is really cool when I get comments from people that say, I'm in my 50s and I love Decoded. And I'm just like, yay, this is so great. We want to appeal to everybody, but because we are a web series, we do really well on Facebook. We do really well on Snapchat. There's a lot of young people on those platforms. And so I'm glad that it's resonating with them.
To do something as ambitious as this and as successful as this, you must have a pretty good orientation, your own sense of what you think of as social justice, something that you work out of, maybe just your own pet theory. Could you share that with us? How do you think about social justice, maybe in relation to your show?
Yeah, for me, social justice is really about making sure that we live in a world that treats everybody fairly and gives everyone the same opportunities, no matter what their race, gender, sexuality, physical ability, mental health is, and that they can be their best and most authentic true selves. And unfortunately, we don't live in that world just yet. So that is why it's important for us to have the type of conversations that are happening here at NCORE, the types of conversations that are happening on Decoded, so people can start doing the work personally and then within their own community.
Oh, I think you're modeling that attitude. It's just amazing. Was there a moment in your education, in your childhood, where you realized, I could make a difference. I could do this kind of work that sometimes is academic or sometimes out of people's reach, but I could go right to young people and speak to them directly and advance the good, make it a little bit better world.
So
or a role model.
I had been on YouTube for about 6 years doing beauty videos, hair, comedy sketches, characters, and in 2012, I had a viral video called Stuff White Girls Say to Black Girls, and it got about 1 million views in one day, and it I think got about 5 or 6 in a week. And I got interviewed by Anderson Cooper. I was on CNN. I was on MSNBC. I was on NPR. I was everywhere. And I realized, holy crap, I started a conversation accidentally that clearly needed to be had. And so I really, from that moment, tried to pivot my content to really start talking about more social issues in a comedic way, because it's something I had dabbled in. I had talked about safe sex, getting tested for HIV, student loan debt. Like, I had talked about big issues in comedic ways, but I realized, I'm kind of onto something when it comes to talking about race. I never anticipated it would turn into a show. But that was the dream.
You're good at it, and it's needed.
Well, and I'm very fortunate, and I think that that's something that's so cool about social media and YouTube specifically, is that now the gatekeepers are kind of gone. If you have a voice, if you have a message, if you have a story to tell, social media is a place that you can do it, and it can turn into a book or a TV show or a movie. And there are just so many cool people that are using the platforms in that way, and I'm really fortunate that I'm one of them as well.
In the area of news, it seems like a bad thing that the gatekeepers are gone because of fake
people,
news, et cetera.
Absolutely.
But in your world.
But at the same time, you saw things like what happened in Ferguson. There were lots of people who were on the ground reporting on Twitter, live streaming things that, mainstream media was not covering, or they were giving, a very limited perspective, whether it was tear gas or tanks or whatever. And we saw people using Twitter to say, no, this is actually what's happening. So I do think there are always going to be people who abuse whatever medium is out there. But at the same time, there are a lot of people that are pushing boundaries and using them in creative ways to educate and reach lots of people.
The example that I find so unspeakable is Flint, where basically an atrocity was happening over 20 years, and nobody did
and social
anything
media has really continued to keep Flint in the spotlight. I think, unfortunately, there is so much going on, and they're not as top of mind as they should be. But most recently, I did hear about a woman who was using, her own company to kind of go in and rebuild some of those pipes. And I really think that the push on social media helped get more people involved, whether it was donating water or, giving people places to stay in and around the Flint area. Who didn't have access to clean water. And so, that's super powerful.
Public betrayal on that level, it's just mind-boggling, et cetera. So many people who work with the issues that you address or any kind of social activism speak about the last 10 years as being a kind of turn away from maybe what they thought was going to be faster progress. I think a lot of people thought there would be racial equity a little bit faster, and it feels like a dark time over the last 10 years. Do you feel that? Are you disappointed at where we are right now?
I think we have made progress, but I also think we still have a long way to go. And in many ways, I feel like post-Obama's presidency, there's been kind of a pendulum swing. I think a lot of people, there was a lot of progress, with same-sex marriage, for example. And I think a lot of people felt uncomfortable, as if it was maybe happening too fast, or they weren't ready for all of these changes. And so I think what we're seeing is a lot of people who felt as if their world was changing and issues were not being focused on them, and there were too many people that didn't look like them that were being on television and getting special treatment. You're seeing a pushback for that. And I think, as heartbreaking as it is, for me, it just inspires me to work harder and lets me know that my work is really important and is needed, and that there has to be a shift in how we talk about these issues, because unfortunately too many people are misunderstanding them or are feeling guilty or feeling angry, when what we really need is for people to have a little bit more empathy for people that aren't like them.
The big theory that I've heard along that line comes from Thomas Frank, that book, Listen Liberal, where he says basically that the white working class, and there are millions of them, just got left out of the conversation, and they're kind of taking their revenge a little bit. They want to be.
I would agree in some ways. One of the issues that we talked about on Decoded recently was 5 issues or stigmas surrounding poverty. And I think oftentimes we don't talk about class. We don't often talk about the intersection between race and class, but we also don't talk about, white, lower class, poor people and the issues that they face. And
the Billy Elegy deals with that.
And I think that, again, I don't like the idea of pitting one type of oppression against another. I think oppression of all kind is terrible, and I want to see a world where everyone is treated fairly. But I think as long as we don't touch on issues that affect lots of different people, yeah, the backlash is going to be, well, you haven't talked about me, so now I'm going to focus on me.
I read something that just kind of gave me chills recently. I was rereading The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And when that book came out in the mid-2000s, there's a paragraph where she says, I'm really worried about the white working class, the lower class. They're out there by themselves. They're going to turn against us. We need to link with them or this is going to be bad later. She basically sort of forecast the future. It was a really chilling moment when she said that.
I mean, reading that was very scary for me as well.
Yeah.
And I do think that it exemplified the need for us to talk about poverty, to talk about class and how it impacts people, and making sure that we have solutions in place. And I think for me, the biggest thing is education. If we had a better educated community, then there would be people who have better access to job opportunities, and a real understanding of how these issues are impacting them. Because unfortunately, a lot of marginalized groups have been pitted against each other throughout history, and that's a big part of what the New Jim Crow is talking about. This idea that lower white middle class people have been told, like, oh, it's the minorities that are taking your jobs. That's why you're poor, and that's not the truth at all. And so, if our education system was a little bit more transparent about the way that we got into this situation, I think that people would be a little bit more open to acknowledging, okay, we need to work together rather than work against each other. I mean, again, education is so important in terms of, giving people upward mobility, and giving them opportunities to create for themselves, whether it's in the workforce or creating their own businesses. And I think that that's something that we really have to work on. And for me, again, Decoded is my way of doing that.
All the issues you're talking about seem to me to be so supremely important, and they're all kind of, just crying out. They need to be dealt with. And, I don't want to embarrass you, but you are providing leadership, and that really is important, what you're doing. Where are the other national leaders? It seems like this is a situation just so obviously cries out for leadership, people that can help folks, help communities, lead the way to face these difficult issues, make connections between poor communities that maybe don't see themselves as having issues that are common with others. Where is that national leadership? Where does it need to come from?
I think oftentimes we underestimate the power of our own voices. Right within our own communities. As much as I would like to see some upper level leadership happening, I think, grassroots organization can go a long way. Working with the people right in your family or in your community to kind of make changes is, for me, I think the biggest first step. I think a lot of people really feel like they don't have the power to do that they need a lot of money, or they need a lot of access, or they need, to be on a television show. When right now what we're seeing is so many people organizing at their town halls, and these videos are going viral.
I've seen them,
where people are yelling at their Congress people and telling them, listen, I'm unhappy. And those videos are getting tons of traction, and people are inspired, and they are calling their senators, and they are, making sure that they're ready to vote in the midterm elections. And I think that that is really, really important. I would love to see, more top-level leadership, but I also really try to encourage people to use their own voices, because we can do a lot as well.
Maybe people had unrealistic expectations of what Barack Obama could do because he was part of a bureaucracy finally.
Again, I think that that's part of our education system. I think a lot of people don't understand what the limits of the presidency actually is, and I think that people think, oh, the president's going to come in and swoop in and change everything, without realizing that change happens at a local level as well. And again, I keep pushing that midterm election date because 2018 is around the corner, and those are where we have super low turnouts. And that makes a huge difference. Who is, making decisions in your neighborhood? If you don't know, then you aren't, informed and doing the work that you need to be doing.
It's so tragic. In the industrial world, we have one of the lowest voter percentages anywhere.
But a lot of people don't think that their vote matters.
Right.
And they don't realize that it's not just them, it's them talking to their family members and their coworkers. And, we've had elections in years past, or local elections, where people have won their seat by a margin of 700, 800 votes, which is not a lot of votes. You know, you probably have like 300 Facebook friends, you know, like hit the pavement and get people voting. And I think that you can actually make some real tangible change.
Okay, let's elevate your position for a second. I think you're an important national leader. You've got a very important voice. Let's make you queen for a bit. And
I don't want to be the queen.
if you could really enact some more extensive change, 2 or 3 things that you think could really make a difference, what do you kind of dream about that changes you would really like to see?
I think the number one, I would say, better funding for education. You know, unfortunately, our schools are funded by the tax dollars in their neighborhoods. So you've got a lot of poor neighborhoods that have poor schools that are overcrowded and have teachers that are not, don't have the right supplies and are working in crappy conditions. And I think that if we had a mandatory budget for schools so that they could get a little bit more funding, so that teachers could be better paid, and they would want to hang out with their students and put in the extra time for
that funding just always seems to drop to the bottom of the pile.
It does, and it really makes a really big difference when you have kids that are better educated. You know, then crime goes down. You know, it's all connected. So I would say that would be a really big one. I'm still really nervous about the whole healthcare thing. I think healthcare needs to be affordable. It needs to be accessible. There are too many people who, especially when it comes to mental health, are afraid to ask for help because of the stigmas, but also because of the cost. So I feel like if there were, just a better implementation of healthcare standards for folks, whether it be making it more affordable, but also making it easier to get, for example, mental health services, is something I would really love. And then I think the third one would have to be the arts. You know, the arts have been so instrumental in my career, and making sure that young people can get exposed to all different sorts of art, whether it's music or dance or photography. All of those things just really help your critical thinking. It makes you just a better person. And unfortunately, our schools have been cutting a lot of funding to the arts.
We seem to be the first to go.
A lot of local arts programming has been cut. And so I feel like if we could see a little bit more money there, I think people would just be a little bit happier if they were able to get access to some creativity in their daily life, and be able to kind of use that to influence the work that they do.
Franchesca Ramsey, thank you so much. It's been delightful to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
And I think people should look for your show, Decoded. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's all we have time for today. Please find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much for being a part of today's show. Join us next time for more current conversations.